The quiet sparked before the storm sun had just set over Los Angeles, blanketing the city in its signature golden hue, casting long shadows that dance across the sidewalks and high-rises. On this particular evening, the buzz wasn't about another movie premiere or tech launch. It was something else entirely. For weeks, online whispers had grown into loud murmurs, speculation brewing across forums, social feeds, and news networks alike. Two icons, one stage, a conversation that was never supposed to happen, but now it was about to, inside the sprawling studio of Global Conversations, the network's most watched international talk show. The atmosphere was unusually electric. Cameramen were adjusting angles with more urgency. Producers were triple-checking cue cards. Security teams, normally discreet, lingered at every corner. This wasn't just any episode. It was the night when Keanu Reeves, the quiet, respected soul of Hollywood, was set to appear face-to-face with Elon Musk, the polarizing genius of modern technology. No scripts, no pre-approved topics, just one theme: humanity and the future. Backstage, Keanu stood in silence. He was dressed in a simple charcoal suit, his long hair tucked behind his ears, his expression calm but centered. To the world, he was an actor, but to those who truly paid attention, he was something more: a thinker, a man of reflection, a voice of stillness in a chaotic age. He had been invited not as an entertainer, but as someone who deeply understood human connection. Pain, purpose, and perseverance dot across the hallway. Elon Musk paced alone, uncharacteristically quiet, known for his sharp mind and unpredictable behavior. Tonight, he'd have felt the weight of what this discussion could become. For years, he had led the charge in reshaping the world, launching rockets, electrifying cars, designing AI that could think like men. But tonight wasn't about technology. It was about vision, ethics. Sold out when the lights dimmed and the countdown began, host Mia Langston, known for her balance and grace in moments of tension, took her place at center stage. Her voice echoed calmly. Tonight, the world watches not for spectacle, but for a rare conversation between two of the most influential figures of our time. Please welcome Keanu Reeves and Elon Musk. The audience erupted, but the cheers quickly turned into an anticipatory hush as Keanu stepped onto the stage from the left, Elon from the right. They met at the center, not with ego, not with bravado, but with a mutual nod of acknowledgement. And then they sat. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation was measured. Mia guided them through their early lives, Keanu's quiet beginnings, his losses, his silent strength. Elon's journey from South Africa, his obsession with solving problems no one dared to face. The audience leaned in, hanging on every word. But it was when Mia asked, "What do you each believe the world needs most in the next 10 years?" that the moment shifted. Elon leaned forward first. "Bold innovation," he said. "We're facing extinction-level threats. Climate change, AI risk, overpopulation. We need action. Radical thinkers, less talk, more tech." He looked passionate, rational, clear. The room nodded. But Keanu sat still for a moment, his eyes gazing not at Elon, but somewhere deeper into the space between words. Then he spoke, progress without empathy. He began slowly. "It's like building cities on broken bones. We talk about Mars, about superintelligence, but we don't talk about the soul, about loneliness, about the child staring at a screen all day thinking it's normal not to be touched, about elders dying without a single person by their side." The room fell silent. "We've built faster cars, smarter devices, but we haven't slowed down enough to ask, who are we becoming?" Even Elon, used to rebuttals and intellectual arm wrestling, didn't speak for a moment. Keanu's words weren't a challenge, they were a mirror, a reminder. Then came the moment no one expected. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "This was written to me by a 13-year-old girl in New Jersey," he said. "She lost her parents to a drunk driver. Her foster home took away her tablet. She wrote, 'Mr. Reeves, I know you're just an actor, but I wish someone like you made technology, because I think you'd ask it not to make us more alone.'" He looked at Elon directly now. "I respect what you do. You're brilliant. But I'm asking you not as a competitor, not as a critic, but as a fellow human. Do you ever pause to wonder if all this advancement is costing us the very things that make us human?" The room was breathless. The camera zoomed in. Elon looked at the letter, then back at Keanu. Something in his expression softened. The deflective smirk he often wore in public was gone. "I do," Elon replied, quieter than usual. "But I've never heard it said like that. What followed in the next hour wasn't a debate. It was a transformation. They spoke of childhood fears, of dreams, of responsibilities. Elon admitted he hadn't cried in over a decade. Keanu spoke about the silent strength of grief. The world watched two men, titans in their own right, begin not just to speak but to listen. But it wasn't overdone as the segment reached its final minutes. Keanu looked directly into the camera. I think it's time we stop worshiping genius and start honoring grace. We need less dominance and more presence. That's the challenge I bring tonight, not just to Elon, but to all of us. It was subtle, but the world felt it. A shift, not in tone, in truth. When silence speaks louder than genius, the world didn't sleep that night. As the final credits rolled on Global Conversations, millions of viewers stayed glued to their screens, breathless, stirred by what they had just witnessed. In an age where live television was often reduced to rehearsed drama and noise, something rare had happened to conversation, not of volume, but of vibration. And at the heart of it stood two men who represented different worlds. Keanu Reeves, the quiet soul who never sought the spotlight, and Elon Musk, the mind that chased stars yet rarely touched the ground of human emotion. But last night, that changed. In the hours that followed, social media platforms exploded. Hashtags like hashtag KeanuVCLON and hashtag The Human Challenge trended across every major platform. Clips of the moment when Keanu read the girl's letter spread like wildfire. Journalists who had covered global summits, tech expos, and UN panels admitted that nothing had moved them quite like that single sentence from Keanu. We've built faster cars and smarter machines, but we haven't slowed down enough to ask who are we becoming. What made the moment seismic wasn't confrontation. It was that it wasn't a confrontation. It was the stillness in Keanu's words, the absence of ego, the vulnerability, the genuine ache in his eyes when he spoke of the girl who had written to him. It was the way Elon, who often parried critics with irony or indifference, had sat frozen, unable to respond with logic, because for once, logic wasn't the answer. By morning, opinion pieces filled every major column. Some praised Keanu's humanity. Others questioned whether Elon's empire was built to fast, to cold. But perhaps the most unexpected ripple came not from critics, but from people, millions of them who saw themselves in Keanu's challenge. Parents, teachers, nurses, artists, even tech workers from Silicon Valley anonymously posted, "He's right." Somewhere along the way, we forgot we were building things for people, not just profit, speed, or glory. At Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, the mood was mixed. Some executives nervously watched stock volatility. Others stared at their screens, unable to stop replaying the final scene from the show. In SpaceX's control room, engineers paused, staring at the Falcon launch projection on the wall, realizing for the first time that in their quest to colonize Mars, they had never once discussed the emotional architecture of future generations. What kind of world were they designing? A quiet, invisible doubt crept in, one that no algorithm could erase. And Elon was alone. He had left the studio without a word to press, without his usual one-liner tweet. He hadn't even opened his phone. He sat in his private suite at the top of a downtown hotel, the lights dim, the curtains half closed, and on the table before him lay the letter Keanu had read. He hadn't asked for it. Keanu had quietly handed it to him backstage as they walked off. No words, just an open palm and a nod. Elon picked it up again, slowly, as if touching something sacred. The handwriting was childlike, filled with small mistakes, words crossed out and rewritten. But the message was clear. "Mr. Reeves, I know you're just an actor, but I wish someone like you made technology. I think you'd ask it not to make us more alone." That one sentence cut deeper than any shareholder report, any competitor's attack, any angry protest outside a Tesla gigafactory. For the first time in years, Elon felt something he couldn't engineer his way out of: doubt. The next day, while the world waited for Elon's reply, Keanu boarded a flight back to New York, alone, as always. He didn't check the trending tags, didn't call his publicist. His life wasn't built for attention. For him, truth wasn't a performance, it was responsibility. What he had said wasn't planned. It had been resting inside him for years, unspoken, until that moment allowed it to rise. And now, it was no longer his. It belonged to the world. But as the jet cut across the clouds, Keanu's mind wasn't on the show. It was on the girl who wrote the letter. Her name was Emily Carson. She was 13, living in a group home in New Jersey after a car accident claimed both her parents. Keanu had met her briefly once during a quiet visit to a children's grief center. She didn't ask for an autograph. She just handed him a letter and walked away. He hadn't forgotten. That night, as Keanu walked into his apartment, a modest, minimalist space far from what most would imagine for a man of his fame, he sat by his window with a cup of tea, watching the city below. And he made a decision. This couldn't just be a moment. It had to be a movement. The next morning, his team received a call. Keanu wanted to fund a nonprofit initiative focused on humanity and innovation, not anti-tech, not fear-based, but a global effort to bring together technologists, teachers, philosophers, and psychologists to design a future that didn't just function, but felt. A world where machines didn't just assist humans, they respected them. His manager was stunned. Keanu, are you sure you want to go head-to-head with tech giants? This could get political fast. Keanu's voice was calm. I'm not going against anyone, he said. I'm standing with people who still believe the heart matters more than the hardware. Meanwhile, Elon's silence continued. His executive team grew anxious. Rumors swirled. Would he tweet something clever to reclaim the narrative? Would he mock Keanu's initiative as sentimental fluff? Would he double down on Neuralink's progress or unveil a new AI feature to distract the world? But none of that happened. Instead, Elon called a press conference. No one knew what to expect. The room was packed. Reporters, tech analysts, social commentators all prepared for a performance. But what they got was something else entirely. Elon Musk walked onto the stage. No presentation, no slides, no graphics. Just him and a single sheet of paper in his hand. The same letter. He looked up, paused, and began to speak. I've been called many things. Visionary, disruptor, even madman. I've been told I think too fast, move too fast, dream too big. And maybe I do. But this week, I met someone who reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He held up the letter. This was written by a child, and it shook me more than any data breach or rocket failure ever has. Because in her words, I heard the one voice. I've been ignoring the voice of the people I'm building for. He looked into the cameras. I don't agree with everything Keanu said, but I respect it. And he's right. Somewhere along the road to the future, I may have lost sight of the present. The room was still. So today, I'm not announcing a new product. I'm announcing a new question. One that every engineer, every executive, every creator at my companies must answer before any launch. Will this make us more human or less? If we can't answer that, we won't build it. The room exploded, not in applause, but in something deeper. Awakening. And in that single hour, something rare happened. Two giants, two worlds, and one truth. It wasn't about who won. It was about what woke up in all of us. The world that paused and then began again. The world didn't just react, it recalibrated. Following Elon Musk's unexpected and deeply human press conference, the ripple effect went far beyond what anyone could have forecast. It wasn't about shares dropping or rising, nor about trending hashtags or media buzz. It was something deeper, almost silent, yet powerful. An invisible chord had been struck in people's souls. The conversation between Keanu and Elon had opened the door in the global consciousness that no corporation, no government, no influencer had dared to touch with such raw honesty. Across classrooms, boardrooms, and dinner tables, the dialogue had shifted. Children in schools began asking their teachers, why don't we talk about feelings in technology class? Admit, a scheduled lecture on quantum neural networks was paused halfway through by the professor, who stared at the projection and simply said, we're training machines to think, but are we training ourselves to care? At Google headquarters, a surprise town hall was organized not by executives, but by entry-level coders who demanded one question be answered. Before they wrote another line of code, does this product add to human loneliness or heal it? And in the midst of this slow, collective awakening, Keanu Reeves stayed mostly silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because he believed the world needed to speak now, not him. He had started something, but he didn't want to own it. That, in itself, made his voice more powerful. Yet something else was about to happen, something even he hadn't foreseen. It was a gray Thursday morning when Keanu's assistant gently knocked on the door to his private office, a modest room in an old brick building in Manhattan's East Village. No velvet couches, no personal assistant desk, just a sturdy oak table, a wall of books, and a large print of Van Gogh's Starry Night hanging above a reading lamp. Keanu looked up from a notebook where he had been sketching thoughts for his nonprofit initiative. She's here, his assistant said quietly, Emily Carson, the girl who wrote the letter. Keanu froze for a moment. Then he closed the notebook, stood up slowly, and nodded. Let her in. Emily walked in hesitantly. She was smaller than he remembered, with timid eyes and oversized sleeves that swallowed her wrists. But her presence had weight. She wasn't the same little girl who had handed him a folded paper months ago. She had seen what her letter had done. And she wasn't just curious anymore, she was aware. Keanu walked over, knelt beside her so he didn't tower over her, and smiled softly. Hi, Emily. Her voice trembled slightly. Hi, Mr. Reeves. He reached out and gently motioned for her to sit. Can I show you something? He walked to his desk and pulled out a binder thick, worn, and brimming with notes, drawings, proposals. At the front was a title, Project Ember. Below it, Humanity and Innovation Initiative. This, Keanu said, started because of you. Your words weren't just a letter. They were a mirror, and I think you deserve to know what they've helped build. He flipped the pages for her, each one outlining ideas. A curriculum for schools that blends emotional intelligence with digital literacy. A code of ethics template for tech companies. A design framework called Warm Tech that prioritizes human touchpoints and user experience. A new certification for AI systems that passed emotional empathy simulations. Emily looked at it all, silent, until tears began to rise. I didn't mean to start something so big, she whispered. Keanu shook his head, smiling. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be felt. And when it is, it spreads like fire. Suddenly, the door clicked open again. Emily turned to see a figure she never imagined would walk into a room like this. Wearing a simple black shirt, hair slightly tousled, eyes filled with quiet intention, it was Elon Musk. Keanu rose, not surprised. They had spoken in brief since the conference. Quiet emails, a phone call late at night where no business was discussed, only questions neither could answer. But today was different. Elon looked at Emily, then at Keanu. I wanted to meet the girl who reminded me what machines can't do. Emily froze, unsure whether to speak. Elon walked over and knelt as Keanu had, offering a small smile. You said you wished someone like Keanu built technology. I think we need to change that. I want you to help me build something. Not when you're grown. Now, Keanu blinked in silent awe. You're not too young to guide us. Elon continued. We've had enough experts. What we need now are feelers. People who sense what's missing before it breaks. It was in that moment that the impossible began to take shape. Not a merger of fame and intellect, not a business alliance, but something pure. A reimagining of what leadership looked like. Keanu, the empath. Elon, the mind. Emily, the voice of those too often unseen. Within weeks, Project Ember launched publicly. What was once Keanu's quiet initiative had now become a global consortium co-chaired by Elon Musk and overseen by a rotating board of educators, artists, engineers, and yes, teenagers like Emily. And the world began to shift in the smallest but most profound ways. Public schools in Finland and Japan adopted Project Ember's curriculum. Apple announced a new line of accessibility-first products after a surprise partnership with Keanu's team. Tesla quietly redesigned its autopilot interface to prioritize not just efficiency but calmness and emotional safety during driving. Hospitals began requesting AI systems that were coded to detect human distress not just through data, but tone and posture. In Nairobi, a childcare startup used Ember's framework to create AI stories that adapted to children's emotional states, helping orphans sleep better. In Brazil, young programmers formed an Ember-backed collective to bring emotional AI into underserved rural communities. And in a quiet village outside Kolkata, a handwritten sign appeared at a school gate. Today we teach the machines how to care. And yet, amidst all the headlines and partnerships, one moment stood out, a single frame, captured by a reporter in a private room during an Ember retreat. Keanu was seated under a tree, eyes closed, with Emily curled beside him drawing quietly. Elon stood nearby, not speaking, just watching the wind stir leaves overhead. The caption below read, "When wisdom kneels and genius listens, the world changes, **, the price of vision." The cost of truth. In the months that followed the global rise of Project Ember, the world witnessed something it hadn't seen in decades, not a revolution of protest or rebellion, but a quiet, sweeping recalibration of how humanity thought about technology, soul, and responsibility. It was no longer just an initiative. Ember had become a movement not owned by Keanu Reeves, not directed by Elon Musk, and not guided by any corporation or government. It was a living, breathing tide of conscious evolution, where ordinary people, engineers, artists, teenagers, parents began asking the one question that Keanu had voiced that unforgettable night. Who are we becoming? But every great movement, every truth that rises and dares to challenge the status quo, eventually meets resistance not from those without power, but from those who have everything to lose, and the first cracks appeared, not in code, not in wires or circuits, but in control, behind the glossy windows of tech headquarters and polished halls of political think tanks. Project Ember was no longer just a curiosity. It was a disruption. Advertising firms, data surveillance conglomerates, and corporate lobbyists had begun to worry not because Ember was preaching fear, but because it was awakening conscience. People were opting out of engagement algorithms. A major social media platform saw a 9% drop in time on site after it introduced Ember's optional emotional reflection prompt. Users were choosing silence over scrolling, connection over clicks. The media empires noticed, not the independent truth seekers, but the global channels that profited off outrage, distraction, and division. Ember was threatening attention, and in today's economy, attention is currency. One evening, as Keanu sat quietly in a small recording studio narrating children's meditations that would be distributed freely to Ember-partnered schools, his team interrupted him. Their faces pale. CNN just ran a segment. His publicist said, "They're calling Ember celebrity spiritualism, disguised as policy." He didn't flinch. They also aired a leaked email from a Silicon Valley executive claiming Elon is using Ember to rebrand after Neuralink's ethical failures. Still, Keanu only closed his script and folded his hands gently. "Let them speak," he said. "That's what they're afraid of. We won't play their game. We're not trying to win attention. We're trying to return people to themselves." But behind the curtain, things weren't so calm. Elon Musk, still steering multiple companies, found himself under a microscope. Anonymous insiders began leaking half-truths, suggesting Project Ember was a veiled attempt at emotional mind control. Articles swirled about Keanu and Elon's unholy alliance. Billion-dollar lobbyists pushed bills to restrict any nonprofit that directly influences machine ethics without commercial accountability. In boardrooms from Washington to Beijing, Ember was being painted as a threat to stability. But it wasn't Keanu or Elon they truly feared. It was the idea that people might start choosing silence over consumption. And then life delivered its own blow. It came on a rainy Tuesday evening in San Francisco. Elon had just returned from an Ember Youth Council event where children from around the world had shared stories about how tech had either saved or silenced their homes. He looked more alive than he had in years, laughing softly with a 9-year-old girl from Ghana who had built an Ember-supported storytelling app using her grandfather's voice. But as he walked into his private home, drenched in success and newfound humility, his assistant met him at the door, trembling. "Elon, it's your son." The next hours blurred into sirens, hospital corridors, stale lights. His eldest son, Xavier, had suffered a sudden cardiac episode. No warning, no prior symptoms. One moment he was sketching music in his room, the next unconscious. The machines did what they could. But fate had already chosen stillness. Elon, the man who had conquered space, broken boundaries, and built machines that mimicked thoughts, stood frozen before a hospital bed, where not a single invention could restart a heartbeat. His arms hung at his sides, useless. His knees slowly bent as he collapsed silently beside the bed, his head resting against his son's hand, still warm, but drifting. No words escaped his lips. No genius arrived to rescue. There was only breath and pain. Keanu was in New York when the call came. He didn't ask questions. He flew across the country without alerting the press. He walked into the hospital without security, no cameras, just a black coat and quiet eyes. He found Elon alone in the hallway. The doctors had left. The reporters were camped outside. The world waited for a statement. Keanu didn't speak. He just sat beside him on the floor, knees bent, back against the wall. Minutes passed, then hours. Only the hum of fluorescent lights above them. And then Ellen's voice, breaking the silence, barely audible. "I could build a city on Mars." But I couldn't keep his heart beating. Keanu slowly turned his head, his voice like calm rain. "That's because you weren't supposed to. We were never meant to replace the heart. Only remember it." Tears finally broke Ellen's composure. Not rage, not guilt, just grief. The kind of grief that unspools time, that humbles every invention, every empire, every algorithm. In the following days, Ember paused all public events, not out of fear, out of respect. The tech world was shaken. Even the media grew quiet. Elon released a single statement. I have built rockets and machines, but I now understand the most sacred thing is the time we're given not to build, but to be with those we love. I will carry my son's light into every decision from now on. If technology cannot protect love, it means nothing. And then, something unexpected happened. For the first time, governments began to listen. The European Parliament drafted the Ember Clause, a motion proposing that all future AI systems must pass emotional resonance tests, ensuring they respond not just to input, but to impact. In South Korea, a team of engineers launched the world's first compassion protocols, coded responses, that adjusted machine behavior based on the user's emotional state. Hospitals in Norway began using AI systems trained not just on medical data, but on grief simulation modules contributed by families who had suffered loss. The world had changed not because of a product launch, but because a father wept. And in his weeping, he remembered what all of us had forgotten. We are not here to outthink each other. We are here to feel, to connect, and to remember that the most powerful intelligence on earth is still the human heart. The village that couldn't be bought. Only built world had held its breath in those weeks following Elon's devastating loss. For the first time in modern memory, headlines across networks were not about markets or milestones, but about mourning. News anchors who once rolled their eyes at celebrity-led reform now spoke in softer tones, their voices heavy with something rarely heard: humility. The man who had once been accused of trying to outsmart nature had been undone by its raw truth. Death makes us equal. It strips away all arrogance. It leaves only the soul. And from that space, something new had begun to stir. Keanu Reeves, who had kept his distance from microphones since the tragedy, quietly returned to the world, not with noise, but with a blueprint. Not a metaphorical one, a real one. Rolled up under his arm was a concept that had been years in the back of his mind, whispered through scattered journals and private conversations with monks, educators, and trauma counselors. It was not a building, not a startup, not another app or initiative. It was a place that shouldn't need to exist and yet had become more necessary than any server farm or shopping mall. He called it Ember Village. The idea was deceptively simple. In a world racing toward simulated connections, Ember Village would be the opposite, a permanent, physical sanctuary where humans could come to heal, reconnect, and remember how to be human again. No Wi-Fi, no advertisements, no digital tracking, just trees, touch, time. Elon, still wrapped in grief, but pulled forward by Keanu's quiet insistence. Read the plans in silence one afternoon in a sunlit garden at Keanu's home. The sketches weren't flashy, no grand domes or futuristic labs, just circular paths through trees, silent huts for meditation, fire circles, communal kitchens run by volunteers, every structure made of local, biodegradable material, solar power for essentials only. The heart of the village, a large, open dome with no walls where strangers could sit in silence or speak with no microphone, no timer, no interruptions. I want this built on land no one can sell, Keanu said, his voice steady. Not owned, not branded, just offered. Elon, once a man whose entire fortune was built on scale, on speed, on disrupting physical limits, felt something in his chest soften. Not break, expand. I'll fund the first one, he said. But it won't carry my name. It never will, Keanu replied. And so, in a quiet valley in Northern California, where wildflowers grew undisturbed, and the night sky still told stories, the first Ember Village began to rise. But it wasn't built the usual way. There were no bulldozers, no gated crews. It wasn't a billionaire's secret project, nor a government grant. It was built by people, farmers, teachers, former tech developers, grieving parents, college students, who paused their internships just to lay stone piles with their bare hands. It took 18 months, and not a single press release was issued until the first fire was lit. When Ember Village finally opened its circle to the world, something miraculous happened. Not chaos, not celebrity fanfare, but pilgrimage. People came from every corner of the globe, not to watch or record, but to unplug, to cry in peace, to tell stories they'd hidden, to sit by a fire with strangers and discover that being seen didn't require being followed, that being known didn't require going viral, that healing didn't happen in likes, but in listening. Elon returned weeks later with Emily Carson, the young girl who had written the letter that started it all. They didn't come for publicity. They came as visitors. Elon sat with Emily beneath a tree, the same one where the outer rings of the village curved in concentric design. He gave her a cedar cutting from a tree that had once grown near his childhood home in Pretoria. They planted it together. She changed my world, he said softly, brushing soil over the roots. Now she plants one. Nearby, Keanu watched, not with pride but with something more grounded, peace. For the first time in years, the noise of the world felt far away, and yet, the impact of what they had all created had never been more clear. Universities across the world began sending students not to Silicon Valley, but to ember villages to complete what were now called restoration internships. Japan opened its own ember village in the shadow of Mount Fuji, where survivors of natural disasters could process their grief beside engineers. Designing early response robotics, in Rwanda, an ember village was built near a memorial site for genocide victims, creating a place where young coders worked alongside elders to create digital tools for reconciliation, not revenge. But ember was not about technology. That was the irony. Elon had once believed every answer could be built. Now, he understood the truth Keanu had always lived. Some answers can only be remembered, and still, even as the world began to shift quietly on its axis, some fought back. Power structures don't bend easily. Lobbyists attempted to frame ember villages as spiritual communes threatening economic productivity. A major AI manufacturer accused ember of romanticizing human limitation. One U.S. senator even claimed, in a public hearing, that Elon had been emotionally hijacked by a pacifist actor. But for every accusation, 1,000 stories rose. A man who had stopped taking anxiety medication after spending the weeks in silence at Ember. A woman who, after attempting to end her life, found meaning teaching children how to knead bread in the Ember kitchens. A child who spoke his first word in a play circle made of mud and laughter and sunlight. And most importantly, a world slowly remembering that stillness isn't stagnation. It's sacred. 1 year after the first Ember village opened, Keanu stood alone inside the central dome as the sun fell over the distant hills. The fires were glowing. Families gathered. Elders told stories. There was no applause, no cameras, just warmth. Elon joined him quietly, holding something in his hands. It was a small wooden box, handcrafted. Keanu looked at him, then at the box. I made this, Elon said. Not designed, not printed, made with my hands. For my son. He opened the lid. Inside, a simple carving. Feel first. Keanu blinked, his voice low. You've come home. Elon smiled, not the sharp grin of a CEO, but the soft grin of a father, a man, a soul. I didn't know I was lost until you stopped trying to change me and just let me listen. And in that moment, they didn't shake hands. They didn't hug. They just stood, side by side, two men from opposite ends of human experience, watching as the world breathed again. Asterisk, a legacy written in stillness. Not stone firelight flickered against the soft grain of the wood beams. Inside the central dome of Ember Village, as dusk folded into night, the air was calm, the kind of stillness that didn't come from silence, but from fullness. Everything felt settled, as though time had taken a long breath and finally exhaled. Keanu sat near the hearth, watching a group of children play with clay in the dirt, their laughter soft and untouched by the noise of the outside world. Across the circle, Elon walked slowly with an elderly woman from Peru who had come to offer stories from her. People tales about the mountain winds, the crying trees, the voices of rivers before electricity came. It had been almost 3 years since that unforgettable moment on live television. What began as a simple question, who are we becoming, had sparked something that no one could package, patent, or suppress. Ember wasn't just an idea anymore. It had become a language, a rhythm, a quiet revolution. Villages had bloomed in 19 countries. School systems had rewritten entire sections of their curriculum to include emotional design, grief literacy, and ethical tech. Companies now partnered with therapists before launching new platforms. And perhaps most importantly, the public had begun to measure progress not just in speed or scale, but in stillness, restoration, and soul. Yet as all seasons must change, so did the time come for a decision. Keanu and Elon had both reached a place few ever truly reached, not the top, but the edge. Not a success, but a self. Keanu, who had lived many lives on screen and off, felt something inside shifting. It wasn't age. It was a calling. He had given the world what he could, his voice, his silence, his truth. And now, he wanted to retreat not in sorrow, but in peace. Elon, after losing his son and reuniting with the heart of humanity, had discovered a new hunger not for invention, but for repair. He wanted to dedicate the rest of his life not to colonizing new planets, but to healing the one we were still destroying, and so, together, in a rare moment under the stars in Ember Village's circular dome, they made a final pact not written, not signed, but spoken like a prayer into the air, before a group of elders, children, and global storytellers gathered that evening. Keanu spoke first, his voice low but unwavering. I never wanted to be followed. I only ever wanted people to pause long enough to find themselves again. So I stepped back now not to vanish, but to vanish into the world, into forests, into libraries, into spaces where names don't matter. There was no applause, just understanding. Elon nodded, his eyes wet, but calm. I spent most of my life believing my value came from what I could build. But in this place, I found the one thing I never engineered, home. I'll keep this work alive, but it'll no longer wear my name. And with that, they placed a stone together in the center of the dome. Upon it were carved no names, no logos, only these words: the future must remember the heart. And then they left not in a convoy or press-covered motorcade, but quietly. Keanu disappeared into the fog of a Canadian forest, later seen teaching philosophy in an unnamed town, sometimes playing music with teenagers at local open mics. Elon moved to a cabin beside a lake, where he taught schoolchildren how to build simple machines not to replace human touch, but to enhance it. Neither man gave interviews again, but Ember lived on. Emily Carson, the girl who once wrote a letter that started it all, now stood at the helm of the global Ember network. At just 20, she addressed the United Nations during the First World Empathy Summit, where heads of state agreed to embed emotional resilience into national policy frameworks. Her voice was calm, like Keanu's. Her ideas were sharp, like Ellen's. But her soul was her own. Progress, she said, is not what we build. It's what we remember. And I remember a man who asked the world to feel again. On the day of the third annual Ember Gathering, as millions tuned in to listen from their homes, villages, and cities, a quiet alert appeared on the Ember platform. A letter had been uploaded. No name, no source, no date. But those who opened it felt something unmistakable. It read, if you are reading this, it means you're ready to listen not with your ears, but with your life. You don't need another hero. You are the spark now. So build slow, love deep, feel first. And when the world forgets again, and it will light a fire, and remind them. Some said it was Keanu. Some said Elon. Some believed it was written by a monk, a farmer, a grieving parent. But everyone agreed it didn't matter, because the truth had outgrown its messengers. It now belonged to the world. And in quiet corners across earth and forests, in deserts, in the cracks between cities, fires still burned, not to destroy, but to remind. The end legacy, a story of heart, hope, and humanity.